Hi, I'm Mark with Crown and Caliber, and welcome to Hidden Gems. Not much in terms of watch design made it out of the 80s, and arguably the Omega Constellation limped out. It is largely forgotten about the watch collecting community. It is not a big hit in the US. It's probably because of its dated design, but it recently got a refresh, and that means it deserves a second look. So let's get into it. So let's start with the history of the watch. In 1982, Omega was looking to update the Constellation line. It's a classic dress watch, been around since the 50s, but it feels dated for its time. And this is the 1980s, quartz crisis, everything's different. Swatches in full swing. We're looking at a completely different way of wearing watches. And they bring in for this a young designer, Carol Diedesheim. She's from the local design school, literally her first job in college. She's still finishing school when she starts this job. For inspiration, while she's trying to think of how to bring a new design, how to bring something that doesn't look like everything else to market, she's actually looked at a bathroom mirror that uses these claws to hold the mirror in place. And that inspired the idea of using these claws to hold down the crystal instead of a bezel. And with another new technology of being able to print on the underside of crystal, the Roman numerals, they were able to create a bezel-less but watertight, ultra-thin watch. And just to complete the watch, they created an integrated bracelet. So you have in the 80s, just a few years after the Nautilus, the Royal Oak, the Vacheron 222, when integrated bracelets were becoming part of the higher end watch community, Omega comes out with their own, the Omega Constellation Manhattan. That's the original name for it. Initially, huge hit. In fact, it becomes such a hit that the Omega Constellation Manhattan became the Omega Constellation. The entire line completely took over one of the core lines of Omega. It got a little refresh in the 90s where they actually got rid of the claws as a functional element, but more as a design element, and added a bezel to it. So it was a little easier to manufacture. It looked a little less Art Deco and 80s and a little more 90s by the time they brought that around. But it doesn't age well. It's not like a tank that is a simple design that feels universal throughout its 100 years of existence. It is very much of a decade. It's a smaller watch, integrated bracelet. The design does stand out. It has existed and continues to exist in that design because of how well it does in other markets. But let's be honest, the Western market is a huge watch market. You want something that can work in both markets. Omega finally in 2020 came out with the 41mm Omega Constellation. It's a slightly larger size than what's classically been. It's usually been a 36mm, give or take a few. It's meant more as a feminine watch or a classically sized men's dress watch. I mean, it's generally meant to be a dress watch, but this gives it a completely different feel. And it's just little touches. The 41mm gets rid of that steel bezel with drilled in numerals. Instead, it puts in a ceramic bezel that puts in the liquid metal numerals that Omega has patented, which means that the metal that fills in those cracks is flat with the ceramic. They're brushed. It gives a little bit of a styling to them, a little texture to them, but it's actually flat with the ceramic. That look gives it a sports watch feel. And you think of ceramic bezels in general. Those are sports watches. That's the Submariner, that's the new Zenith, that's the Omega Seamaster 300Ms. A ceramic bezel means sports watch. It has a integrated bracelet, but in this case, it's a leather bracelet. So again, more of a dress watch feel, but integrated still gives it a little bit of a sports watch feel because that's what we're used to with integrated bracelets. For me, that's the sweet spot. This is the kind of watch that does it all. It's a different design, it stands out, it still has the scalloped edges, it still has kind of the claw look to it. It's this universal design that feels at home. On top of that, you have the Omega Med Test certified movement. Great technology, don't have to worry about going through a metal detector and getting magnetized or something like that while traveling. I personally love this one because it has they call it a silk textured rhodium dial. I like a textured dial. It gives something a little different to it. It's something we see in Grand Seikos that works so well. And rhodium's a really cool way to finish a dial. It literally does change color from a silver to a gray, and depending on how much you use, even to a brown. In this case, the silver to gray. And that gives it a little more fun to the watch. I'll give the hot take here. The watch that's probably thought of most, that is simple, works anywhere, about the same price range, and has a date, is the Rolex Datejust, which is another one that's the design has been around forever. A Datejust can be, and for many people, a perfect one watch. But for me, I like this watch so much better. I like the Art Deco feel to it. I like the different design. It feels fantastic on the wrist. It feels modern, except for it is a design that's been around for 4 decades. And this really is the best iteration of it. It really is one of my favorite watches to come out in the past few years. And this is not a sales pitch. This is a personal opinion. I will take this watch over just about anything that's come out in the past few years. To me, it is that well executed, with the exception of the Odysseus. I'll take an Odysseus over this, but for the different price range, for this, where you're talking about the price range this sits in, there's no other watch I think is as well executed on a day-to-day basis, yet it gets completely ignored. And that is really what makes this watch a hidden gem. Even if the OMEGA Constellation doesn't speak to you, I hope on a second look you appreciate it. That's what Hidden Gems is all about, taking a second look at a watch that doesn't always get that chance. See you next time on Hidden Gems.